This is Solve It for Kids.
Hello, my amazing and curious friends. My name is Jennifer, the Dean of all things STEM and STEAM, and this is Solve It for Kids, the science podcast that gives kids and families a peek inside the real world of scientists, engineers, and experts as they solve problems in their jobs using creativity, cooperation, and critical thinking. And now please welcome to the show my podcast partner, Galactic Space Geek, Jeff Gagne.
Hello, Jennifer, and hello, listeners. More episodes about animals. Yes, please. I love learning more about animals.
Exactly.
Especially ones that nearly all of us think are super cool.
Yes, and this one is going to be an excellent episode with lots of great information. So what problem are we solving today?
How do you rehabilitate a bald eagle?
Ooh, how do you rehabilitate bald eagles? You know, they are some of the coolest birds, I think. So I can't wait to hear about our special guest and how she does this. So who is our guest, Jeff?
Our guest today is the terrific Marge Gibson. She is founder and executive director of the Raptor Educacation Group.
Welcome to the show, Marge.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to be here and share my passion.
Oh, well, we can't wait to hear all about this. And so I'm wondering, since you've been working with raptors for many, many years, as a kid, did you always like birds?
You know, it was my first word, birdie.
Oh my gosh.
And so
No
I
kidding.
really didn't have a choice. I just, I was born this way.
Okay.
So what did you do as a kid with the birds? I mean, how was that your first word? Did you see them? Your parents talk to you about them?
You know, my parents were very natural oriented, and I was the youngest. I was born kind of late in their life, but they really liked everything. But birds had a real fondness with them. But when I was really little, my parents have some interesting stories that I would be, now I don't remember some of this, but apparently we had a field across the street and I would hear the killdeers, which would call at night when they call to locate their youngsters. And one night it was raining really hard and I was 3. And I got out of my bed and I went downstairs. I went out the door and I went into the field to help because I thought he needed my help because he was crying, the killdeer. So when they woke up, I wasn't in the bed.
Oh my gosh.
I got stuck in the mud in the field and they were hysterical. And
you're just trying to help the bird.
I was. And so I didn't want to leave the field either, even when they found me, because I was still convinced that it needed my help.
Oh my gosh.
So their life was challenging while I was a child.
Sounds like it. But I guess you're right when you say you were born to it. Wow, that's amazing.
Very much. Yeah, it's really interesting. My brother and my sister, had the typical cats and rabbits and that sort of thing. And my dad worked for the DNR. So occasionally he would have, a fox or something like that, that during those years that they would bring home. But for me, it was all about birds. And it was something about, I would see them and just, I just felt like I knew them. I knew everything about them. And so it was just instinctive.
Wow.
Did you ever have any birds as pets?
I had parakeets, yes. I got my first parakeet when I was 5 for my 5th birthday. And, they're fascinating and they can learn to talk. And so, he was a great pet. But it was the wild ones that, when the swallows were nesting, for instance, I liked to watch them, feed the babies. Not, in hand, but, watch the process.
Right.
And, robins when they nested. And my grandmother had chickens. So chickens were also one of my favorites. And pretty much anything in feathers was fascinating to me. And became really, I just wanted to be around them a lot.
Well, that's fantastic. I remember as a kid, and that was a long time ago, that One time on our porch, I grew up in central Illinois, we had a robin's nest. And I remember we'd stay inside, we wouldn't bother, but you could see it and you could see the eggs and you could watch. And I still remember that. My mom she was very much an outside person too. We were outside all the time. It was amazing. So you took that love of birds. Did you go to college and train with birds, or what did you do?
Well, the interesting thing is that when I was 8, I was coming home from school and I was really a quiet kid. I was one of these nerdy little kids that, didn't get along with many people. I mean, I identified avian. Come on.
That was me.
They were like, whoa. So I was on my way home from school. I was about a block and a half from walking home. And we had a big storm, and the storm brought down a branch, and there was a Baltimore Orioles nest in it. And I saw these 2 boys that I know that were on bikes, and they had stopped their bikes and laid their bikes down, and they were doing something. And so, I came upon them, and they were doing bad things to the baby birds that were in the nest. They found the nest, and then the babies were only like 2 days old. They were teeny little things. And it was probably the first time I ever stood up for myself or anything else. And and they were a little older than me, and kind of, the kids that would tease, at school, that sort of thing.
Sure.
So I grabbed the babies and I pushed one guy down off the bike.
Wow.
Little kid. And I was 8, and I ran like the wind home and got in my garage and ran in the house and holding these little ones. And my dad saw me running and it came out. And then he went to talk to the boys. But meanwhile, I had these little, basically one that lived. It was a little Baltimore Oriole in my hand. So my parents, they didn't have wildlife rehabilitation in those days, of course. This was 7 years ago. So, we had a gas stove. My mother, we knew we had to keep it warm. We put it in a little strawberry box on the pilot light.
Oh, wow.
And then made a concoction of, smashed insects and some egg yolk. I mean, they really stuck to the idea of having the correct proteins and things for an insectivore baby. And we fed it, and it turned out to be a male Baltimore Oriole. And we released him. He learned to chirp with my parakeet.
Oh my gosh.
But he returned. I was in college, and my parents would send pictures every year when he would come back, because he would come back to sit on the part of the garage roof. And then he would have babies, and every year, they mate for life. So, unless something happened. So every year we knew when they were getting ready to leave for migration, because they would come back, and all the little kids would be in the lilac bush, and he would sing and sing and sing. And the next day they would be gone.
Oh my gosh.
And so, they would, my parents, we had the Super 8 video, at that time, and they would take video and send them to me at college. And, of course, I named him Angel because, I was a little kid.
Yeah.
And he was very special. And he was the first bird that I, basically rehabilitated.
Wow.
And then with my dad, doing the work he did, if something was found that, that needed help, he would bring it home. And I think it was probably that way before I was born too, with other animals, foxes.
Wow.
Right.
But then it kind of got focused on birds when I arrived. And because I think the force was strong within this one.
Nice.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So you just mentioned this is before bird and wildlife rehabilitation. Can you give us a quick idea on sort of when that really became a thing, where we really started helping to rehabilitate wildlife?
Actually, it became a federal situation. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Department of Interior is the head of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which protects birds. And to care for them, or to have them, in your possession, so to speak, whether it's hunted birds and, you have to have a license to hunt them, or any wild bird you're not supposed to have in your possession. And they developed finally a permit so people could take care of them. But that wasn't really that wasn't really developed or really used until the 1970s. So it was
Okay.
a long time. And so what happened was, members of the public would find, a little robin that needed help, and they would, it was that little lady in tennis shoes down the road who took care of things,
Yes.
and but that's the way it was because there was no formal
Right.
way to do
Right.
it. And then U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service started doing the permit process, and they called it wildlife rehabilitation.
Wow.
And it is very regulated still. And the states are also involved with it, but regulated so the birds they can't be pets. And, you
Yes.
can't raise them
Okay.
imprinted, you can't sell them, you can't trade them. If you raise them, they have to be released to the wild. And, that doesn't always work out as well if someone raises them and, I think sometimes they get lost in the process. But legally, you have to have a permit, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the state that you live in, to be able to care for wildlife and to rehabilitate it and get it back out into the wild.
Wow,
Okay.
which is the goal. So, I mean, that leads us into the question, how do you rehabilitate bald eagles? So you went from an oriole, I'm assuming there were steps, to now raptors and bald eagles, which are fairly large birds, right?
They are large, but birds are birds. They all wear
Yes.
feathers. And they're all wild birds have an amazing instinct. And I think that, they evaluate their environment constantly. They have to.
Right.
To have evolved to where they are, they have to be very good at what they do. They have to not only survive, but thrive. And that means
Yes.
the youngsters have to have the proper nutrition to grow up with, strong bodies and good feathers, which for birds
Right.
is really vital. If they don't have
Right.
feathers and they don't have, they're not waterproofed, which is they have a eupygeal gland, an oil gland at the base of their tail. And so when they're preening themselves, they're rubbing oil on their feathers, which actually repels water.
Oh,
Never knew
I
that.
didn't know that either.
Birds are they're very complicated. And, in fact, it's funny because when people find little ducks, they think, well, they'll just put them in the water. But if they're just hatched and the mother hasn't had her beak on them, which she carries, she uses some of her oil and she puts it on the babies, and
Right.
you don't see that happening. And there's no instruction booklet, and then they're all wet. I mean, we put them in the water, or if they hatch them at home and then they put them in water, well, why don't they swim? Well, because they're not waterproofed and they get wet and then they sink. So if a bird is, for instance, any bird, if it's outside and, and you've had it indoors and it doesn't have good feathers, it's not producing the proper oil in the eupygeal gland, it can't keep itself waterproofed, and you put it outside, it will be suddenly just really wet. And, it can't thermoregulate at that point. It can't keep itself warm. And, so there's a lot of science in birds, really a lot of science, which is one of the things that fascinated me so much.
Wow.
Right. So with you starting all the way back, being as young as you were, how did you end up gravitating towards raptors and bald eagles?
I always really liked watching raptors, and
they're gorgeous to watch.
I really enjoyed. We had Northern Harriers by our house, and I always enjoyed them, and they just they were fascinating in that they're long lived, they mate for life. I mean, there's all kinds of things that really related to to our own society.
Right.
They're excellent parents, and they protect their families, which we do too, or we should.
Yes.
And so when I started, I had some of my patients were hawks when I was young. I really started in earnest doing wildlife rehabilitation when I was about 11. I took care of 100 birds in my parents' garage that summer.
Oh my gosh.
I didn't have a social life, just saying. I was that nerdy little kid that, didn't have a voice unless somebody was doing something to a wild creature, and then you better watch it because I was,
I like it.
But they're really fascinating and so intelligent. I think that's the thing that surprises everybody when they start working with them, whether I have interns, and I do have interns from all over now. And, they're always surprised at how aware they are of their surroundings and how they evaluate on the fly. I mean, just I could get a bald eagle in a big box, come into my clinic, and, I talk to it, and, they don't understand our language, but they understand the intent. And it's the same thing as if you come up to someone and grab them like this or do something like that, we don't use the big gloves because they can't feel you through them. And remember, when they hunt or they fish, their touch is really important. They can feel the animal.
Oh.
So there are a lot of things that, that I've learned through all these years. That is really one of them. They trust right away if you're trustable.
If you're trustworthy, yes, exactly.
They will know.
If you come at them and you're like, well, I'm going to take, I want to, it's funny because some people, want to overpower them. I mean, it's this whole like, I can take care of that eagle, I'll overpower. And the eagle's like, I don't think so because you are not somebody I can trust.
Yes.
Anyway,
my gosh.
I am stronger than you, sir.
Yeah.
And we are. So
No kidding.
It's really trust and a mutual understanding of the situation, I would say. They know they need help if they've been hit by a car.
I was just going to ask that. Yeah.
Yeah. They absolutely know they're not, whatever's happening out there isn't working for them. So they, come to us usually in like a large cardboard box, a towel on the bottom. And I just say, I'm going to pick you up now and, show them my hands, talk. But it's your voice. I think part of it is your and your approach, how, in other words, they also know. I mean, if you're afraid of them, we are, for instance, I don't know if you've ever worked with dogs or whatever, but your dog knows when you're afraid or whatever, or if you're upset or, they do as well. Just because they fly doesn't mean they don't have those many out there. And, I suspect that we probably used to, but we've lost a lot of that because, we don't have to, we no longer protect ourselves or we don't throw our food. So, but I think, they really do. And they get it really quickly. You do have to know how to handle them. And if they're poisoned and it's a neurotoxin, of course, their brains aren't acting perfect. So you kind of have to evaluate that sort of thing if their eyes are, dilated or whatever. But they're amazing. They truly are. I can send you some photos later, but if you've looked at our Facebook, you'll see we just handle them. And
I've seen some of those. Yeah, that's pretty incredible. So can you tell us, like, how do you rehabilitate them? Like, if you get an animal that's been poisoned or has been hit by a car, like, because I've seen on your Facebook, you do some pretty amazing rehabilitations and you re-release these beautiful birds. What's the process like to do that?
Well, the end product, as always, when they come in, is to release them. So everything that we do is focused on making sure that they come out of whatever situation they're in, whether it's, hit by a car or poisoning or shootings, that they have to go back to the wild and they have to be perfect. They have to be functionally perfect.
Yes.
If they're not, they're not going to survive. So whether it's feather quality and, muscles, the flight muscles, super important. Aerodynamically, they have to be perfect.
Wow.
So we have a large flight building that's 110 feet long and 28 feet high.
Oh, wow.
And they exercise. So the conditioning is a huge part of their recovery. We can take care of them in the clinic, which is basically the hospital. And we can, treat them for lead poisoning or treat them for other poisonings, fix a wing or whatever it is. But at the end of the day, they have to, when they go out into the conditioning flight, that's really vital to their survival.
Wow.
So they're in the conditioning flight until they are flight perfect. And we have cameras so we can watch them.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
And they're just, you have to be sure that they're perfect. So when they leave here, every feather has to be in, everything, because I always tell people, eagles are big birds.
They are.
They're like, they're not unlike an airplane. If you're flying in an airplane and part of one wing is gone, you're like, we need to land.
Now, right now.
Yeah, right. Oh, we are not flying in this airplane. And think about it, if the tail isn't right, in other words, aerodynamically, they have perfect. And just like whether it's a plane or anything that's in the air, aerodynamics plays a huge part in their success. So we fly them, and then at the end of that period, and sometimes it's several months, before they're ready to go back out into the wild. So there's a lot and I would say that while there is veterinary medicine involved, rehabilitation is kind of an important aspect to it. We need to know their natural history, the natural history of any patient that we whether it's a bald eagle, and what time of the year do they arrive here if it's a migratory species? What time of the year do they breed? Are they territorial when they breed? And so we don't want to, for instance, release an adult near a territorial nest, because that would not work out well.
Oh, yeah.
And
that makes sense.
So you really have to know, as I say, the natural history of the species that you're recovering is really vital. And you have to know everything about them before you can rehabilitate or recover them from any sort of injury, because everything is dependent on, their release, their recovery, where they're going to go, their natural history, just really vital to rehabilitation.
Right. Yeah. So you mentioned a couple of times that they have to be perfect to be released back out. Mm-hmm. And you also mentioned that they don't speak to you. So how do you know when they're perfect? Do they give you a little wink, or do you have a checklist of things that you are looking for? How do you know when they've reached that perfect?
Absolutely. Every day that they're in the clinic, we go through various parameters. And, that would be, if their vision is good. I mean, if they're having any nystagmus, or their brains are, having some problems. Is their vision okay? And so we do go through checklists. They have to be kind of medically cleared in those areas. And it's a daily thing. I mean, it just like
that makes sense.
Any patient recovering, we check them on a daily basis and to see where they're at, and make sure they're eating, make sure they're putting on weight.
Wow.
There's a whole long list of things to do. Make sure they're well hydrated, or that they're maintaining hydration. So the final stage of the clinic is when they're in a small enclosure, and we treat them, and we're either treating them perhaps with antibiotics or something like that. Often we're tube feeding if they're at a point where they can't digest. If they're at a starving situation, we have to tube feed because they are unable to digest. It takes energy to
That's true.
Calories.
Right?
It takes calories to use calories. So if they're in a negative balance when they come in, and often wild birds are, because before they can be rescued or picked up, people have to notice them. And to notice an eagle in a field, they kind of hide. When they think that they can recover on their own, they aren't going to make themselves apparent. So when they do, then it's time to call in rescue, so they can be brought into the clinic and then cared for. And then we go through the recovery process with them. But by the time that happens, especially if they have something like lead poisoning, which shuts down their intestinal system and then shuts down all organs, then we have to tube feed them, kind of, a high nutrient, but easily digestible, because their intestine isn't working well. So, but they have to, it has to be easily absorbable. So it's a process. It does, times it can take months, and each one, depending on why they come.
Why they're there. That makes sense.
So each one has a different caloric need and that sort of thing.
Right. So when you release them, do they go back to where they came from? Do they know their, basically natural area where they lived before?
The thing about birds is their natural GPS is uncanny.
Wow.
They migrate.
Okay.
I mean, the robin from your porch, goes down to Florida for the winter. The orioles go down to South America.
Wow.
A tiny hummingbird will fly across the Gulf of Mexico in one flight and go to South America. And then when it comes time, like right now, we have, it's migration back here now. And when it becomes time for spring, they come back again to the same house.
Wow.
They have a lot of natal fidelity. In other words, that's where they hatch.
Right.
And so they have fidelity to that area. And then they disperse from there. In other words, mom and dad are there. You can only have so many adults per hectare or whatever, or acre.
Right.
So, they disperse from there, but it's a gradual dispersal. But yes, they know exactly where they're going. And, the amazing thing about birds is they migrate, and we know so little about how that happens. We kind of think that, we're really cool with the GPS in our phones.
I couldn't find my way around without that.
I got to that next town okay because my phone.
That's right.
Now, and sometimes people used to think that they would follow the parents. And that isn't true for all species. In fact, in loons, the youngsters migrate first, and they go down to the Gulf of Mexico from our area. And then mom and dad come later. But then on the reverse, when they come back in the spring, they go back to the same lake where they were hatched.
Wow.
And they all kind of hang out for a minute and a half, or they hang out and say, hey, good to see you, whatever, glad you made it. Okay, now go and be on your own, son. It's been nice, but y'all go.
Okay, before we go to the challenge, I do want to give you an opportunity. Can you tell everybody about the Raptor Education Group and where they can find more information and support your nonprofit?
Raptor Education Group is a nonprofit, and we do wildlife rehabilitation, education, and research. You can find us on the website, raptoreducationgroup.org. And we also have a very active Facebook where we try to present a lot of our cases. It kind of gives people a really good opportunity to understand our work and understand the birds especially, and what, what happens to them, and, some of the things that perhaps people can do to prevent some of the problems for them and be, good stewards of the world around them.
I love your Facebook page. They have you guys have amazing pictures there. So now we're at the time in our show where we ask our guests to give our listeners a challenge. I'm curious what your challenge will be, Marge.
I think it would be amazing if everyone would learn 3 things about the world around them that makes a difference to them. And perhaps that they can then do things to assist and help the world around them.
I love that.
I like that.
Yeah.
Because everyone is going to have a different area around them. I like that.
Yes, that's great. Well, this has been so fantastic. I am so excited that we got to talk to you about this and your bald eagle rescues, because I've been hearing about them for a very long time and watching them on Facebook. So thank you so much for being on Solve It for Kids, Marge.
Thank you, Marge.
You're most welcome. It's been really fun, and I love your program. So it's so wonderful for children.
Thank you.
You bet.
What a fun and educational episode. I really, really enjoyed this one. I am having memories of being at my very first museum when I was a kid. Back in Worcester, Massachusetts, there were bald eagles there. They were always fascinating to look at. And to learn more about them in detail is super cool. Especially, I loved learning that they have so much sensory touch in their talons. Wow, had no idea.
Yeah. They're so majestic. I mean, yes, they are, America's national bird, but I don't know. They're gorgeous, and it's just beautiful to watch them soar through the sky and all this kind of thing. And, you know, I think I really like the challenge that Marge left us too, that was kind of like, think about the world, right, Jeff?
Yes. So learn 3 things about the world around you that are important to you or meaningful to you. And I love that because not everybody is going to walk outside in their backyard and see bald eagles flying around. So she opened up the challenge to learning about the world that's around us and what is meaningful in our area. I will definitely be doing this on my drive home from work in Colorado, because I end up driving through mountains on one side of the road, plains on the other side. There is lots here that I can learn more about.
Right. And this kind of echoes what I say when I go to my school visits, is notice the science all around you, right? So learn about the world, notice the science, notice everything around your world that kind of makes you appreciate it more. So if you go outside and notice the world around you, or the science around you, and like to share it with us, you can tag us on our social media. We are at KidSolve at Facebook, X, and Instagram. And don't forget to check out our website, solveitsciencepodcastforkids.com, where we'll have information about this episode. You can learn about Raptor Education Group there, so please check that out. And we'll also have books at the bottom for kids if they want to learn more about bald eagles or any kind of birds that people work with and rescue. So make sure you go and take a look.
Solve It for Kids is the science podcast for kids and families. So until next time, you'll hear Jen and Jeff on
Solve It for Kids.